Hello and welcome to another NARFE Federal Benefits Institute webinar. My name is James Marshall, the Deputy Director of the Federal Benefits Institute, and I want to welcome everybody today. Today's webinar is called Retirement Forms, the Devil's in the Details, sponsored by Aetna. So I've got a few words I'd like to say about Aetna at the very end of today's presentation, but we want to thank them for sponsoring today's webinar, and I want to thank you for joining us. Whether you're a brand new member of NARFE or whether you've been with us for many years, I thank you for serving my country as federal civilians, as well as those of you who've been in the military, but also thank you for becoming a NARFE member. For those of you who just joined us for the first time and you've never really taken or attended any of our, or joined us for any of our webinars in the past, I want you to know that this webinar will be recorded and made available to you, so you can watch it at your leisure. You can fast forward, rewind. Sometimes it is helpful to go back and watch these webinars more than once. Usually within 24 hours, it'll be available on the NARFE web page. Also, you'll have a Q&A at the end of the session, and we'll give you instructions at the end of today's presentation to how to join us for the Q&A. It'll be a live Q&A, a chance for you to ask me specific questions that I'll do my best to spend as much time as I can with you. It's usually scheduled for an hour to answer your questions. But that Q&A will also be made available for you to read through online by the end of the day usually. And the third thing that is going to be available to you and uploaded online is a copy of the entire presentation. A lot of these slides will have little web links that you can click on, or some of the pictures. You can click on the picture. It'll take you to some information or a web page for more details about that particular item or that topic. And maybe even some of the forms. Absolutely, all the forms that I'll talk about today, you can click on any of them. It'll take you right to the forms if you wanted to fill them out online, for example. So a lot of good information coming your way. I won't bore you about my background. You can drop me a note at NARFE headquarters if you want to talk about it. But let's just get into the material today. So it's very important when you apply for your retirement to make sure you dot all your I's and cross all your T's properly. Otherwise, you know, if you don't fill out the forms properly, it can cause some delays in the processing of your retirement. It is your agency's retirement office responsibility when you turn in your retirement application package for them to review the forms that you submitted, and they're supposed to double check things, but they sometimes overlook things. They might miss something, or when they fill out their portion of your retirement application, they might make some mistakes, and these issues or these mistakes could cause delays in the processing of retirement. So that's why you're with us today, and that's why we're going to take some time today to kind of cover those areas where people have trouble or sometimes make mistakes. So we're going to work on that together today. So there's 3 stages of retirement planning. So when you're getting ready to fill out your retirement forms, hopefully you've already done most of your pre-retirement planning. And that is, you know, can I afford to retire? You know, do I have enough money? Is my pension going to be enough? Do I have enough retirement savings? Do I have something else I want to do, like another job after I retire from federal service? And it's one thing to be financially ready to retire, but it's another thing to be mentally prepared to retire. So we're not covering that stuff in today's webinar. We're going to talk about the forms, and we'll talk a little bit about that transition period when you go from being a federal employee to becoming a full-time federal retiree. And we'll also talk about some changes, some options that you'll have after you retire from federal service to make adjustments or make certain changes to certain things, or claim other sources of income that you might not want to claim at the same time that you retire from federal service. So this slide right here is a summary of most of the forms that we're going to talk about today. So it's a nice little document you can maybe download when you get the copy of these slides. And all those form numbers or form names or those websites, those are all links that you can click on and take you right to the forms or right to the online application for Social Security, for example. So if you're CSRS, you're obviously going to use the CSRS retirement application, and if you're FERS, you're going to use the FERS retirement application. And we got both the web links there. But regardless of what retirement system you're under, if you're carrying federal employees group life insurance in retirement, you're going to use the standard form 2818. Okay. Now, when you apply for Social Security, in most cases, you're going to find it very easy to simply go to Social Security's website and apply for that benefit online. There are some rare exceptions and some scenarios where you might be better off scheduling an appointment with the local Social Security office to apply for your benefit in person. But in most cases, I think you're going to see for both Social Security and for Medicare applications, the online process that Social Security provides is very easy to use and very efficient. There are going to be some situations where some of you might have to apply for certain parts of Medicare using forms. that you would have to submit or turn into your local Social Security office. But that usually only applies when you're retiring from federal service on the other side of 65 years old. Because otherwise, if you're retiring before 65 years old and you want to apply for Medicare at 65, you're going to find that it's a very easy process using their online application. And of course, right now, there's currently two different types of forms that you can use with the Thrift Savings Plan to start withdrawing your money from TSP after you separate from federal service. One of them is a partial withdrawal, and another one's a full withdrawal. But we'll spend a little bit of time at the end of today's presentation talking about some of the changes that you might expect to happen in the fall of 2019. Okay. So let's do a little Q&A. We're not going to keep score, so don't feel bad if you don't get the question right. But how long before you plan your retirement date? How long before your planned retirement date should you submit your CSRS or your FERS retirement application to your agency retirement office? What do you think the best recommendation would be? When should I submit my forms to my agency retirement office? Do you think 2 weeks, right before you retire? You want to give your agency a whole year? Or maybe 2 or 3 months is okay? Or what about 6 months? Well, if you guessed 2 or 3 months, that's what most agencies recommend. But I do recommend that you simply contact your agency retirement office, perhaps about a year before you retire from federal service, and ask them, the answer to this question. Because sometimes they might be busy during certain periods of time of the year, and they might want you to submit the forms a little bit sooner than other times. But most agencies recommend about 2 to 3 months before you separate from federal service that you would submit your retirement application to your agency retirement office. Okay. So earlier this year, we did a nice webinar in January called Map Your Way to a Smooth Retirement. I highly recommend, if you're getting ready to retire from federal service soon, that you go and watch that webinar if you haven't already, because there's certain things that you'll learn about in that webinar that you should have done years before you retire from federal service. And there are certain things you can only do while you're working. So certainly take the time to go back and watch that webinar from January. One of the things you want to do years before you retire is just make sure that your agency retirement office has all of your federal service history documented properly, both civilian and military service if applicable. Because it can take months, it can take years to find missing records. And if they have to recreate certain service history, that can take even longer. And you don't want to be dealing with that kind of problem when you're trying to apply for your retirement from federal service. And at least 5 years before you retire from federal service, it's highly recommended that you start getting retirement estimates from your agency retirement office to start looking at those numbers and seeing if they line up with what you expect them to be. Because they do sometimes make mistakes on retirement estimates, and you just want to make sure the numbers are correct. And at least maybe about a year before you retire, that's when you would contact your agency retirement office to say, hey, look, if I retire next year, how many months notice do you want for me to submit my retirement paperwork? And where do I get my forms? And are there any special forms that I need to fill out that other agencies don't? Because there are some agencies that have special forms that they want you to fill out for retiring from that agency. But the forms we're going to talk about today are the forms that everybody would use to retire from CSRS or FERS at any agency. So it's really up to you to find out from your agency retirement officer if there's any other forms that they also want you to fill out. But we're talking about forms today that will end up in the hands of the Office of Personnel Management. So a lot of those forms you can download from OPM's website directly. And of course, later when I talk about the Thrift Savings Plan withdrawal forms, you're going to be getting that from TSP website. Okay. So if you don't know who your agency retirement office or officers are, you would use this slide here. Remember, you can download this PDF file and click on this OPM seal, and it'll take you to a web page of all the agency retirement offices in just about every agency in the federal government. And so it'll give you usually a name, an address, a phone number, and an email address, so that way you can reach out to your own agency retirement office. Now, if you reach out to one of these people listed on OPM's website, that individual may or may not be the person who will actually process your retirement, but if they're not that person, they will be able to tell you who that person is, so that way they can give you that contact information. So it's a very useful resource for those of you who may or may not know who your agency retirement office is. Okay? So when you get ready to fill out your retirement paperwork that you'll get from your agency retirement office, or they'll tell you where to download it, or you can just follow the instructions we're giving and go to OPM's website directly, you're going to be downloading all these forms, and you're going to end up printing off probably about 30 to 40 pieces of paper. But I want you to relax knowing that most of that paper will be just a bunch of instructions, And there's only a few pieces of paper you actually have to fill out. And there's actually a few pieces of paper that will be buried or embedded in your retirement application package that your agency has to fill out, that you leave blank. They're going to fill out those forms. And there's even other forms that the payroll office will end up filling out that you'll see, but you'll ignore it. If you simply walk through the instructions, take it one step at a time, fill out the forms, you shouldn't have any trouble. Just take your time with that. Okay. Maybe start preparing a little to-do list as you're preparing to retire from federal service. Not only do you want to know where do I download the forms and when do I want to turn the forms in, but you also want to start gathering other documents together if you don't have them in a readily, easily accessible place, like your marriage certificate if you're married. Maybe if you have any dependent children, you might want to have copies of the birth certificates, any type of military records that may or may not already be on file with your agency, as well as any divorce decrees or court orders if and only if that divorce decree or that court order dictates that a former spouse gets a federal benefit. Otherwise, if your court order or divorce decree is silent about federal benefits, you kept your benefits and they keep their benefits separate, you don't have to file that with OPM. Also, you'll want to start thinking about, am I going to be claiming Social Security? Because that is a separate process, but some of you will be too young to claim Social Security, so maybe you won't be worrying about that when you retire from federal service. Some of you will be old enough to draw Social Security when you retire, but maybe it's not time. Maybe you don't need that money yet. So again, that could be on or off the to-do list depending upon your age and what you need at retirement from federal service. Same thing with TSP and same thing with Medicare. If you're younger than 65 years old, unless you're dealing with a disability, you're probably not going to worry about enrolling into Medicare until you're 65 years old. So let's start taking a closer look at the retirement application package. Whether you're CSRS or FERS, one of the first forms and one of the first sections you're going to fill out is about information regarding who you are and where you live and how they can contact you. They being OPM, because even though you're filling out this paperwork 2 or 3 months before you retire from federal service, you want to make sure that you're giving them contact information for where you're going to be living and how they can reach you after you retire. So definitely don't be putting your work, your agency work numbers there or your address if you're going to be moving a couple of weeks after you retire. You want to make sure that they have the address where they can reach you after you retire. And if you've gone by any other names, you would want to list all names you've ever gone by while working as a federal employee or serving in the military. So it's very important that you have that information all up to date and accurate. Okay, because a lot of people will sometimes put an address where they're no longer living by the time OPM gets this, or a telephone number they no longer have. Not a bad idea to give them 2 phone numbers. If you're not home that often, maybe give them your cell phone number as well. Okay. Now, Section B on both the SERS and FERS retirement application packages, Section B2 is actually just for a place for you to put your date of retirement. So earlier this year, we had a webinar called What's Your Best Retirement Date? So if you haven't had time to watch that, I do recommend that you take the time. That webinar will help you fine-tune the date that's best for you. What day of the week, what day of the month, what day of the pay period, what day of the year, what's the best month to retire. It's all explained in that webinar. Okay, so you can put whatever date you want. Okay, so just keep in mind, if you choose a date where your annuity might not commence for a couple of weeks, then you can relax knowing that you will have as much as 31 days of free federal health trunks and federal life trunks. So that's usually not a problem. So you don't have to worry about that. But some people do choose better dates where they don't have any gaps. But it's not a big concern if it's less than 31 days. Okay, so go back and watch that webinar and get more details about that. And that webinar will also help you minimize the amount of time between your last paycheck from your agency and your first retirement check from OPM. Now, another section that you would have to answer yes or no to is Section B4 and B5. If you have military service, you say yes or no, do I have military service? Now, if you have military service, it's going to refer you to a Schedule A and B. So that's another form that's buried or embedded in your retirement application package that you would fill out to give OPM additional details about your military service. But if you answer no, then you wouldn't have to fill out Schedules A or B, A and or B. So if you paid a military deposit, your agency should know about that. But if you have any evidence of paying a military deposit, you might want to include that with your retirement application. But they're going to ask you that question, yes or no, did you pay it? If you have any service that's not reflected on a DD-214, you might want to include that. And also copies of all your DD-214s if their agency doesn't already have copies of them. And if you plan on waiving your military retirement, so that way you can combine your 20-plus years of active duty retirement with your FERS or CSRS civil service in your computation of your retirement, then you would include a copy of that letter from the Military Retirement Office saying, yes, we're going to waive your military retirement on the date that you retire from federal service. Just keep in mind, if you're receiving any VA benefits, that tax-free money you might be receiving, none of that ever has to be waived. And of course, same thing with military health insurance like TRICARE, you would never have to waive that if you plan on waiving military retirement. But that only applies to active duty retirees in most cases. All right, so that's Schedule A and B under both CSRS and FERS, if and only if you have prior military service. Now, an area that a lot of people sometimes make mistakes is if they're retired from the military reserves, which falls under Title 10, which is usually a situation where you might have several years of active duty, but you also have several years of reserve time. And then you've got enough points that qualify you for a military retirement at age 60. That falls under Title 10. That's not the same as an active duty retirement. So when you fill out Schedule B in your retirement application package, and I don't know if you can see these questions on this slide, so I'll kind of read them out loud. The question is basically saying, Schedule B, if you are receiving or have applied for military retire or retainer pay, complete parts 1A through 1D below. Okay, so the first question that I marked yes in this example was, are you receiving or have you applied for military retire or retainer pay? And so this guy's already passed his 60th birthday, so he is collecting his reserve retirement from the military, so he said yes. Okay, question B, was your military retire or retainer pay awarded for reserve service under Chapter 1223, Title 10, U.S. Code? And this guy's going to say yes, because he's not an active duty retiree. If he was retired from active duty, he would have said no to that question. So he says yes to that question. Okay, and of course, he attaches a copy of his notice of his award that he's receiving that Title 10 reserve retirement. Okay, now the question C says, was your military retire pay awarded for disability incurred in combat or caused by instrumentality of war or incurred in the line of duty during a period of war? Now, this individual said no, because he doesn't have any type of documentation that says his military retirement is based on combat disability or instrumentality of war. So he's answering no. Okay. Now, question D, are you waiving your military retire pay in order to receive credit for military service, in this case is a FERS, for FERS retirement benefits? And he's saying no. And the good news is he doesn't have to, because he's not retired from active duty. He already paid his military deposit for all his periods of active service. And so he's going to get credit for that under FERS, and it won't impact his Title 10 retirement. So, but he needs to fill out the form this way, so that way OPM understands this. So that's why I included it in one of the documents you can download as an example of how you would fill out Schedule B on this part of the retirement application package. It is a common area that some people make mistakes. All right, now we're going to get into different sections depending upon whether you're CSRS or FERS. You see, if you have any workers' comp claims that you're either currently receiving or received in the past, this is the spot on your retirement application where you would tell OPM about it. Okay, so Section C if you're CSRS, Section F if you're FERS. So it's not a bad idea, by the way, when you're ready to fill out your retirement forms, to maybe print them all off and go back and watch this webinar so you can pause at each section, especially if it's something that you want to pay close attention to. Now, don't worry, if you don't have any workers' comp claims in the past, you could simply say, no, I don't have any workers' comp, and you wouldn't have to fill out Schedule C. Okay, but we are on different sections. So for whatever reason, whoever decided to create the FERS retirement application form, they decided, you know what, even though these are the same questions that we ask CSRS folks with their retirement application, why don't we just move it somewhere else on the retirement application package? So that way, if somebody ever wants to teach a class or present a webinar, and they're trying to teach both CSRS and FERS what forms and how to fill out the forms, it will make it very complex. So I doubt that that's really what was on their mind, but certainly when they created the retirement application package for FERS and decided to do it completely different than CSRS, they certainly didn't make it easy or simple to follow. So I just want you to be aware that if you've ever filed any workers' comp or you are currently receiving workers' comp, that you would just list it on your retirement package. Okay. If you're currently receiving workers' comp, you're not allowed to receive both workers' compensation and a FERS or CSRS retirement at the same time. You can still apply for your retirement, but you wouldn't receive your retirement income until your workers' comp stopped, until your workers' compensation stopped. So be aware of that as well. Okay. Again, we're going to be in different sections, so I'll just rattle them off. They're right here on the slides. So there's other claim information that you may want to tell OPM about if applicable. Otherwise, you would just say no if none of these things apply to you. So for CSRS, other claim information that you previously filed in the past would be section C2 and 2A, and FERS would be section F2 and 2A. So one of the most common mistakes that I see is when people say, because the question basically says, do you have any other claims that you previously filed in the past? Well, I'm filling out my retirement application package, and people will say no, but then all of a sudden they'll see retirement and say, oh, I guess I need to check that box. Well, you would only check the retirement box if you're retiring for the second time. Maybe you've been rehired as a reemployed annuitant, and you would say, yeah, I've already retired in the past, but I'm retiring again. So you'll confuse OPM if you check that retirement box. So if you've not ever retired in the past, don't check that retirement box. Leave it blank. Okay. If you ever took a refund of CSRS or FERS contributions after leaving federal service for a little while, you would check that box. But if you have no breaks in federal service, you would not check that box because you can't take your money out of CSRS or FERS unless you separate federal service. Okay. If you paid any deposits or redeposits, or if you've applied to pay any deposits or redeposits, you would check that box, whether it be military or civilian. And if you applied to make any civilian deposits, maybe it's a good idea to attach that civilian deposit statement you got from the Office of Personnel Management, even if it was years ago, and attach that with your retirement paperwork. And it would have your civil service deposit claim number on it. And so there's a section where you can write in your CSD number on this application form. And if you're CSRS and you previously filed an account for voluntary contributions, you would tell them about that here. Otherwise, you would leave this section blank, and you would have previously answered the question saying, no, I don't have any other claims like this that I've ever filed in the past. Okay, so that's that section, other claim information previously filed. Okay, now whether you're married or not, this section you do have to answer the question, yes or no. Are you currently married? Because if you leave this section blank, because a lot of single people do, a lot of people who are single, they'll get to this part of the retirement application and they'll see it's marital information. I say, I'll skip it because I'm not married. Well, here's what OPM will do if your agency doesn't catch that mistake. OPM receives your retirement package. They'll see that you left that section blank, and they'll put your retirement package on the back burner. And when they finally get around to contacting you and reaching out to you, they might give you a retirement check. But they got to find out from you first, are you married, yes or no? So don't do that. Just say no if you're not married and move on to the next section. But if you are married, of course, you're going to provide some information about your spouse. It also asks you a question, do you have a living former spouse from whom which you owe court-ordered benefits to? Okay, and if the answer is no, you simply say no, and there's no reason to attach a court order with your retirement application. But if you answer yes, because you do have a divorce decree that says your former spouse is entitled to either a piece of your federal pension or maybe a survivor benefit or both, then you would attach that copy with your retirement package. You would say yes to that question. Now, if you divorced 10 years ago and your divorce decree says your former spouse is entitled to a piece of your pension or they're entitled to a survivor benefit, that's when you should have filed your court order with OPM, with the court order benefits branch, years ago. Because if you wait until you apply for your retirement to file this divorce decree that says your former spouse is entitled to some of your retirement, then it could seriously hold up your retirement for a very long time if that divorce decree is not written properly. Okay, so definitely reach out to us at the Federal Benefits Institute if you have any questions about that. But again, that's if and only if you owe your former spouse something based on a court order. Otherwise, there's no reason to attach that kind of divorce decree if they keep theirs and you keep yours with your retirement package. And don't forget, include a copy of your marriage certificate. Again, if you're married at retirement. Okay. Now, Section F for CSRS and Section D for FERS is where you're going to make an election about an annuity and what type of annuity do you want. And you're going to do this whether you're married or not. And this is another section that a lot of single people will skip because they'll say, oh, that must be for elections for spouses, so I'm going to skip that section. But again, that'll hold up your retirement. So you're going to mark at least one of those 5 boxes in this annuity election section. Okay. Now, if you're single, you would elect box number 3, no survivor annuity. You don't want to elect something and pay for something that nobody's going to get. So if you're single, you would normally elect no survivor annuity. If you're single, you do have the option to choose number 4 or 5. If you used to be married, if you're still friends with your former spouse, there's nothing wrong with electing a former spouse survivor benefit if you wanted to. And again, we talk about this information in a lot more details in our survivor benefits webinar that we did a couple of months ago that I highly recommend that you go back and listen to if you want more details about all these options, these annuity elections. Okay, but if you have somebody who has an insurable interest in you, but they're not your spouse, you would have to be healthy to make the election for number 4, but there's a cost associated with that you would want to review, not only in the instructions, but also in that webinar that we did a couple of months ago on insurable interest survivor benefit. But most people who are single, they're probably going to just choose number 3, knowing that if I ever get married later on in life, I've got 2 years from the date of any marriage as an annuitant to contact OPM and elect a survivor benefit for a future spouse if I want to. We'll talk about that a little bit later in today's presentation. Now, if you're married, you're going to elect either 1, 2, or 3 in most cases. And rarely will you ever elect 4 or 5 if you're married. The only time you elect number 4 if you're married is if you have a divorce decree that says your former spouse is entitled to a full survivor benefit, and now you're married to somebody new, and you know that OPM cannot pay out more than a full maximum survivor benefit to a combination of former and current spouses, you might want to consider electing an insurable interest survivor benefit, item number 4, for your current spouse if you're afraid that you're going to pass away before both these people and you would like to protect your current spouse. Okay, but you're still going to choose probably 1, 2, or 4 if you're married. Because if you choose number 3 for the person you're married to when you apply for your retirement, that person can stay into your health insurance plan for the rest of your life. But if you die first, because there's no survivor annuity payable, they've already waived it back whenever you applied for your retirement, they got to go find health insurance somewhere else. The exception is if you're a Fed married to another Fed who qualifies for his or her own federal health insurance through their own retirement. Or if you're married to someone who's retired from the military and maybe they don't care about your federal health insurance, they like their TRICARE, maybe that's not an issue. But for everyone else, I think that's a warning that you'd want to be aware of. And the application for retirement puts it in fine print. If you elect item number 3, your spouse has to sign off on that. And when they sign off on it, it has to be signed in front of a notary. It's a notary's responsibility to make sure the spouse reads the fine print about that warning on FEHB access. And that has to be signed in front of a notary. So you can't be twisting your spouse's arm and say, baby, why don't you just sign off on partial, or why don't you sign off on no survivor annuity? You don't really need that much money anyways, because they have to sign that in front of a notary. So you really can't twist their arm on that. So it's a conversation that you want to have with your spouse if you're married at the time of retirement. Do they want a maximum, partial, or no survivor annuity? More details about the costs and payouts on that in that webinar that we did a couple of months ago. All right. So I mentioned that if you try to elect anything less than a maximum survivor benefit for the person you're married to at the time you apply for retirement, you have to get their consent. So that consent would be signed in front of a notary using a form that's also embedded in your retirement application package. We often call it the -1. So remember, the -1 is only necessary if you're electing anything less than a full survivor benefit. So if you're electing the maximum survivor benefit for your spouse at the time of retirement, that's one less piece of paper you have to fill out at that time. Now there's an insurance section on your retirement application package. It's section D if you're SERS or CSRS, or it's section E if you're FERS. Okay, and it's basically just asking you a question, yes or no. Health insurance, are you eligible to keep FEHB in retirement? Life insurance, yes or no. Are you eligible to keep your federal life insurance in retirement? That's all they ask. They don't ask you, do you want it? They assume you want it. If you want to do something with your health insurance, you got to go out of your way to do something about it. We'll talk about that today. The same thing with life insurance. If you want to carry a certain level of life insurance, you're going to fill out that standard form 2818 that we mentioned earlier, but we'll also talk about today. Okay, but you're right. This section of the form, though, you're just say yes or no. Am I eligible to keep my FEHB and FEGLI? And we're going to talk about the 5-year test for both FEHB and FEGLI in just a few minutes. Okay. Do I have to provide any FEHB coverage for children based on a court order? Yes or no. That's a simple yes or no. Federal dental or vision, as well as federal long-term care insurance. They ask you yes or no. Do you have it? Are you enrolled? And if you are enrolled, it gives you a little instruction. It says call them. Call benefits if you have federal dental or vision. Call long-term care partners if you have federal long-term care insurance, and let them know what day you're retiring, because they may want to coordinate with you. Because unlike health insurance and unlike life insurance, which is automatically transferred to OPM, the dental and vision and the long-term care insurance is not automatically transferred to OPM when you retire. So you just reach out to benefits for dental or vision. You reach out to long-term care partners for that insurance. They have the toll-free numbers on both these questions on the actual application, and they will give you instructions on how to maybe make those payments while you're in temporary retirement pay status. But once your retirement is finalized by OPM, you can coordinate with those organizations to have the premiums withheld from your monthly retirement check. So just be prepared for that. But you can't mess that up because the instructions are pretty clear on the retirement application itself. Okay. Now, at the time of retirement, when you're applying for your retirement, if you have any unmarried dependent children, you would list them on your retirement application because OPM wants to be aware of them. If you pass away with a dependent child as an annuitant, OPM just wants to know they exist. So you're going to list them on your retirement application. Now, for this purpose, and they explain it in the instructions, you would only list children who are younger than 22, as long as they're unmarried and full-time student. Okay? And the one exception that they talk about in the instructions is you can list a child who's older than 22 if they have a health issue they incurred prior to their 18th birthday, and because of that health issue, they're dependent upon you, they're incapable of self-support, that can be a 40-year-old or a 30-year-old dependent child. So you would list them. And we talked about it in the Survivor Benefits webinar a couple of months ago about the details you see on the right-hand side of this slide, how much each child would get per month up until a certain age, and normally it's 22 is the cutoff. And if you have 3 or more dependent children at the time of your death, they would take the maximum payable per month and divide it by those 3+ kids. And if there's a double orphan, meaning no parents surviving in the picture, they don't double the amounts, but the amounts increase a little bit. But these are automatic. No election is required. It doesn't cost you a dime, but you just need to list your dependent children on your retirement application if and only if you have them as your dependents at the time you retire from federal service. Okay. Now, we're going to start marrying us together again. Now we're in the same section. CSRS and FERS, we got Section H, items 1 through 4. So this is where you're going to tell OPM where you want them to send your retirement check. Most people are going to want a direct deposit. So you're going to give them your bank account information. And you're also going to give them contact information, including a phone number where OPM can contact your bank if they're having any trouble depositing your retirement income into that bank. Because I'd rather those two entities talk to each other than me try to get in the middle. I give them my checking or savings account number as well as the bank account information and contact details. I can also tell OPM with this section of my application whether or not I want federal taxes withheld. Okay, and more details about federal tax liability on my pension using the IRS publication 721, or maybe talk to my local tax advisor. So I can tell them yes or no, and if I want them to have taxes withheld, there's a section where I can fill out telling them use the W-4 form that my agency has on file, or here's a new form that I want you to use. Maybe I can use a W-4-P form, which stands for pension, to tell them how I want my federal taxes withheld or how much. Now, you're not going to really be able to tell them to withhold state taxes initially, but once your annuity gets finalized by OPM, you're going to be able to log into the Retirement Services Online portal using your account and your password that OPM will give you, and you'll be able to tell them not only this is how much money I want withheld for state taxes, but also maybe I want to make a change to my federal tax withholding. Okay, but again, the state taxes is if and only if you live in a state where they tax you on your pension, because there are some states that are tax-friendly for federal retirees. Just keep in mind, just because a state is tax-friendly doesn't always mean I want to live in that state for retirement purposes, but you want to be aware of that. And I think every April, our NARFE issue of our magazine talks about the state tax rules for all the states. All right? So most importantly, maybe not most importantly, but very important, don't forget to sign your retirement application package. A lot of people forget to do that, and if the agency doesn't catch it, it will hold up your retirement. Because who knows who filled out your retirement package, but it's got your John Hancock on it, so you filled it out. So I think it's very important because a lot of people, they get these retirement application packages from their agency sometimes a year or two before they separate, which I don't know if is a good idea because they can update these forms and you don't want to submit a form a year from now that's no longer valid. You want to use the most revised, recently revised form. That's why you usually want to contact your agency and request the forms because they should always have the most recently revised forms. But can you imagine I've already filled out most of the forms, but I didn't sign and date it yet because I am not going to retire for another year. I don't want to date something a year in advance. So I didn't sign and date it yet. It's in the top drawer of my desk at work. And I have it there because it reminds me of how lucky I'm going to be in about a year from now, that I get to retire from federal service. And also it reminds me if my boss comes in and makes me mad, I can just open up the drawer and sign and date it and turn it in, and we're done. I can change, I can obviously fill out the form and change the date of retirement. By the way, while I said that, don't scratch things off and write something in. They won't accept it. So anytime you make a mistake on these forms, you need to go ahead and print off a new one and fill out a new one, because you don't want to be crossing things out. They don't let you do that. They don't accept things that are crossed out and initialed anymore. So make sure that they're fresh. But not only do you want to sign and date it, but use the checklist. There's an employee checklist on that page. At the very bottom of the page, right below where you sign and date it, there's an employee checklist that will tell you whether or not you need certain forms in this package submitted. So that way you say yes, or you say no, or not applicable. And that way, that'll make sure that you also dot all your I's and cross all your T's. Okay, very useful checklist at the end of that section. Okay, now I do recommend that when you turn in your retirement application package to your retirement office, you ask your retirement office, what's going to happen next? And maybe have a calendar in front of you and start writing down things on the calendar. They will tell you, well, give us a little time because we're going to prepare a retirement estimate for you, and we're also going to prepare a certified summary of federal service for you to verify and make sure it's accurate. We're going to need you to sign and date that and turn it back to us. And based on your retirement date, we're going to send everything to payroll on this date, and then payroll will take this long to probably get everything to OPM. By then, you'll get your last paycheck by this date. And then you'll get all your annual leave by that date, and you should get a letter from OPM by this date, and you should be in temporary retirement pay by this date. You see, that's the kind of conversation you want to have with your agency retirement office when you turn in your retirement package. Because if you don't have that conversation, you're going to be in the dark. You're not going to know what to expect and when to expect it. But if you know what to expect and when to expect it, if something doesn't happen, and the time frame they said it should happen, that's when you pick up the phone and call someone and say, hey, I think maybe the ball was dropped. You said I was going to get something by this date, but I haven't. Oh, so-and-so went on vacation and they forgot to process your retirement. So let's get the ball moving. So again, that's why, for many reasons, I recommend that you definitely find out, what am I going to get? What's going to happen? What's the time frames? Every agency retirement officer should have their finger on the pulse of how long it takes to get stuff, to get your retirement processed, because they're processing retirements every month. But with this certified summary of federal service, it's very important for you to verify that it's accurate. But you don't want to wait till you apply for your retirement to find out that they're missing a part of your service history, or find out, well, I paid my military deposit 20 years ago. Why doesn't it say deposit paid in full? I don't want to have that kind of conversation. This is one of the things that I talked about in that webinar in January. This form doesn't have to be certified till you apply for retirement. 20 years before I retire from federal service, I can have my agency certify my entire service history. I'm sorry, provide me with a summary of federal service. It doesn't have to be certified till I apply for retirement. But it's just a working document. If you look in the upper left-hand corner of the certified summary of federal service form, it'll tell you that this form has a secondary purpose. It's not just for people who apply for retirement. It's also a form that you can request from your agency retirement officer anytime you want to make sure that all your federal service is documented properly. I want to verify my retirement STD is what it is. I want to make sure that all my deposits are paid in full if applicable. So lots of good information. 99% of the problems people have when they retire is because they never requested a summary of federal service years before they retired, and there's missing stuff. It could take months or years to find and recreate missing records. So I can't emphasize the importance of this as much as I can today. So if it's all correct, you'll simply sign and date it and give it back to your agency. So that's how that would handle with a summary of federal service. And of course, the agency has a checklist that they're going to also fill out some things. And they're going to pull some things out of your OPF and merge it with your retirement package. They're going to forward it to payroll. Payroll has 30 days for the date of your separation to get everything over to OPM. And by the time OPM gets your retirement package, you might already be due your first retirement check, which is why it sometimes takes about 5 to 6 weeks, sometimes 7 weeks to get your first retirement check. So be prepared for that. You might want to get copies of whatever the agency fills out for you, just in case OPM calls you up one of these days, say, hey, we got your retirement package a couple of weeks ago, but we're trying to reach your agency retirement office, but we can't seem to get them, and the copy of the agency checklist they gave us is not readable, but you have a copy at home. So that's why I recommend getting copies of not only what you submitted, but get a copy of everything the agency submits for you that's going to be part of your retirement package, including anything they pull out of your OPF, especially if it gets lost en route, through payroll over to OPM, and it gets lost somewhere along the way. You got a photocopy at home. You can take care of that business pretty quick. So make copies of everything, not just what you submit, but also what the agency submits on your behalf. All right, ready for some more Q&A? All right, so the next question. How long will it take for OPM to process my retirement from CSRS, CSRS or FERS? Okay, and you notice the answers look very similar to the question I asked earlier in the session. So what do you think? OPM is going to process your retirement in 2 weeks? Okay, I can hear some of you laughing right now. What about a year? Do you think it's going to take a whole year? Maybe 2 to 3 months? How about 6 months? What do you think the average is? The majority of people, believe it or not, have their annuity finalized by OPM within 2 to 3 months. Okay, now it's not necessarily 2 to 3 months from the date they separate, because it takes 30 days sometimes for agency to get everything over to OPM. When OPM reports these numbers, I think they report the numbers based on how many days does it take to process somebody's retirement from the date we receive it from the agency. So if it takes, if more than half the people are getting their annuity finalized within 60 days at OPM, that means they've probably been retired for about 3 months. So we're talking about 3 to 4 months on average. And you can see that November through January is a very busy season. Lots of retirements. August through October is pretty popular as well. Okay, but even the ones who don't have their annuities finalized within a couple of months, average the ones above that, it's still 3 months. So we're talking about maybe 4 months on average. And the people who are waiting longer than 4 months, there's lots of reasons, but we talked about it in our January webinar. But one reason might be that your agency dropped the ball somewhere along the way, or that you didn't follow the advice. You didn't verify that your agency had all your service history documented properly, so you're trying to jump through hoops. Or your agency's summary of federal service wasn't accurately depicting your service history. Or you didn't file a court order properly, and your divorce decree wasn't written properly, so it's holding up your retirement. But most people, who have all their ducks in a row, crossed all their T's, dotted all their I's, they're getting their annuities finalized within 3 to 4 months from the date of their separation from federal service. Okay. There's some additional forms that you may end up including with your retirement package for different reasons. Okay, but some of you might not be worrying about this as much. If you are one of the few people, and there's not that many, and again, the Survivor Benefit webinar talks about this a couple of months ago, what an insurable interest election is. It's something that you can only make at retirement. But if you have somebody who has an insurable interest in you, especially if they're not your spouse, you have to be healthy to make this election. And it can be pretty expensive, cost prohibitive. But you would include a copy of your current medical exam if you're making that election. But again, most people leave that section blank, so most people don't worry about that additional forms for that purpose. Another thing that most people don't worry about is dealing with a life-threatening illness when they apply for retirement. If you're healthy, if you take your money out of the civil service, retirement system, or FERS, you're going to forfeit your pension. But if you have a life-threatening illness at the time that you're applying for retirement, you could qualify for something called the alternative form of annuity, AFA. It's calculated the same way your pension is calculated, but you get a refund of all the money you put into the CSRS or FERS retirement system. Okay, and you just take a very small yet permanent actuarial reduction for the rest of your life for the amount of money that was paid out to you based on your age at the time of retirement. But that reduction is so small compared to the money you got up front, it would take OPM about 15 to 20 years of reducing your annuity before they would have a chance to get that money back from you. That's if you live 15 to 20 years. If you die a few months later, that money is deemed paid in full, effective the date of your death, and therefore would not affect any widow or widower benefit that you would have elected if you were married at retirement as far as survivor benefits are concerned. They would still get a full survivor benefit as if you never took the money out to begin with. So I included a couple of the forms for more details about that, if and only if you or somebody you know is dealing with a life-threatening illness at the time they apply for retirement, because it's not something that I can apply for years after I retire. If there's any other military documents that your agency doesn't already have on file for you, as far as your military service is concerned, including any waiver of military retirement pay, including any retirement award that you would have gotten under Title 10, usually at age 60, you would include that with your retirement application package as well. If you ever filed an application to set up a voluntary contribution account, and again, this is only for CSRS or offset folks, you would use the RI 38-124 form to tell OPM what you want to do with your voluntary contribution account if you haven't already closed it out previously, because you're not allowed to continue keeping a voluntary contribution account years into retirement. OPM cannot finalize your retirement until you tell them what you want to do with your voluntary contribution account. If you haven't already set up a voluntary contribution account but you want to, but you're getting ready to retire in a couple of months, you can simply attach the standard form 2804 application to make voluntary contributions with your retirement application package. And what OPM is supposed to do is set up the account while they're adjudicating your retirement and give you a one chance opportunity to drop a bunch of money in that account that you can use for the same purpose that somebody else who's already previously set up the account. What most people do with these voluntary contribution accounts, when they fill out the RI 38-124, they transfer any taxable amount that's sitting in that account, i.e. the interest, over to their TSP account, tax deferred, or a traditional IRA, tax deferred, and any amount they contributed to it can be transferred over to a Roth IRA. So drop us a note at the Federal Benefits Institute if you need more details or information about this type of program, if you're CSRS or offset. Okay, because we'll give you more details, including rules on unpaid deposit and redeposit service for that as well. What's another type of form that you might want to include with your retirement application package? Well, maybe an OPM form 2809. And I want to point out and make it very clear that the OPM form 2809 looks a lot like a standard form 2809, but they're two completely different forms. The standard form 2809 is for employees to make changes to their federal health trends. The OPM form 2809 is for retirees to make changes to their federal health trends. It's very clear on those forms. There are certain things you can do with an OPM form 2809 that you can't do with a standard form 2809, and it has a lot to do with the tax rules. While you're working, you got pre-tax rules that prevent you from doing certain things outside of a qualifying life event or an open season. But once you retire and you're no longer paying health trends on a pre-tax basis, they afford you the options to do some things that you can't do while you were still working. So there's two different forms, okay? So one reason might be, well, I'm retiring, I'm signing up for Medicare because maybe I'm already past my 65th birthday. I'm using my special enrollment period that starts on the date of my retirement to get into Medicare Part B without any penalties, even though I signed up for Part A a few years ago. And maybe the health insurance plan that I've had while I was working as my primary health insurance was the Cadillac plan, very expensive, meeting all my needs. But now that Medicare Part A and Part B is going to be my primary, maybe I want to use the OPM form 2809 and consider switching plans. I could do that, but I've only got one of those options because it's not really a qualifying life event to retire, and I'm not in an open season, for example. So I may want to save that once-in-a-lifetime option to change plans for later on in life. If I ever want to change plans in the middle of the year and I got a major health issue and I want to go see a doctor that's not part of my network, then I might want to switch plans. You've only got a once-in-a-lifetime option. It's on the OPM form 2809 to change plans. So I might want to wait till the open season to make that election. But what if I am retiring at the end of December? Or what if I'm CSRS retiring on January 1st, 2nd, or 3rd, for example? If I'm making an open season election as an employee, my agency will cancel my open season election when I'm not a federal employee on that Sunday in January. In this case, coming up, 2019 is January 6th, if I remember correctly. They'll cancel that election. So if I want to make an open season change as a retiree, but unfortunately I'm still working throughout the end of the year during the open season, right about the time open season is happening is when I'm turning in my retirement application package. So I'm not going to submit a standard form 2809. I'm going to submit an OPM form 2809. I'm going to attach it with my retirement application package. And that form, I'm going to tell my agency, do not process it. It's not for you to process. Because a lot of agency retirement officers will think it's a standard form 2809. They'll separate it from your retirement package. They'll send it to the open season team in HR. The open season team will process it, but it will be canceled. You see, they made a mistake. They should have kept it with my retirement package because OPM will process it during the adjudication of my retirement, and they'll make that effective the commencement of my annuity in January. So it's very important that the OPM form 2809 be kept with your retirement package as it passes along to OPM. That's why I would consider using a cover letter. So the cover letter could be just in my own words explaining why I'm attaching this form to my retirement application package, because I don't want the agency to make a mistake. And sometimes I'm educating my retirement office on the purpose of this form, why some people might want to make an open season election with a retirement application package. Okay. If you ever cancel your FEHB, normally you can never get your FEHB back. But on the OPM form 2809, it says if I cancel my FEHB to be under my spouse's FEHB, I can get my FEHB back if I lose my spouse, or if my spouse decides to switch from a self-plus-one to a self-only plan when she finally retires from federal service 5 years from now. So maybe that's what I'm doing. I'm married to somebody who's working longer. Maybe I want to cancel my health insurance so that way I can be under my wife's plan, because I'm not allowed to be under more than one FEHB plan at the same time. So I'm not canceling my health insurance as an employee. I'm canceling my health insurance as an annuitant. And so I attach the OPM form 2809 with my retirement package saying I'm canceling FEHB, and it gives me an option to say, why am I canceling it? And I'm going to say I'm choosing to be under my spouse's FEHB plan. And I'm going to coordinate that with my spouse's agency to make sure that the same date that my coverage is under her plan, she's got a self-plus-one that starts on January 6th, well, then that means January 6th, OPM should cancel my policy. And if anything happens to my wife, or if my wife retires and decides to drop me from her plan when we're both paying on post-tax basis, then I can get my own health insurance back by filling out an OPM form 2809 when she switches, because that would be a qualifying life event. And she would attach an OPM form 2809 with her retirement application saying, I want to switch to a self-only plan when I retire. But the reason why we want to be covered by her health insurance plan is twofold. Number one, pre-tax is better than post-tax premiums while she's still working. Number two, if I'm already 65, I don't have to worry about Medicare until she retires, because I'm still covered by my spouse's employment health insurance plan. So I'm saving money on Medicare. Her employment health insurance plan is going to be my primary provider, whether I have Medicare or not. All right. If you want to suspend FEHB for something like TRICARE, military health insurance, you would use the RI 79-9 form. But keep in mind, you can't have FEHB in retirement if you don't have FEHB on the date you separate. I'll talk about that in a moment. But if you have FEHB and you also have access to TRICARE, either through your own military retirement or your spouse's military retirement, just know that once you retire, not until then, but once you retire, you can suspend your FEHB coverage anytime you want. And if you suspend it, you don't pay for it, you don't have it, you're happy with your TRICARE. But if you ever want FEHB coverage back, you can unsuspend it during any open season that you'd like. So some people like to have FEHB as a backup plan, just in case they have TRICARE and they want to go to a doctor that's not necessarily covered by TRICARE one of these days, or they move to a part of the world where the TRICARE network's not meeting their needs like it is in the DC area, for example, or Congress comes down the pipe and messes with TRICARE. It doesn't cost a dime to suspend my FEHB coverage for TRICARE once I retire from federal service. Another thing you might want to think about when you're applying for your retirement is your beneficiary forms. You don't have to. If you're happy with the beneficiary forms, or if you're happy with the federal order of precedence that we talked about a couple of months ago in the survivor benefits webinar, you don't have to update these forms. But it's a good time to think about it, just in case it's been years since you've thought about it, and maybe people that are important to you have come in and out of your life over the past few years. So whether you're working or not, if you want to update your TSP beneficiary form, you submit it directly to TSP as per the instructions on the form. Your federal life insurance form is in your OPF, but if you want to update it, you simply attach it with your retirement application package, because that's all your agency will do is certify it and send it along to OPM, along with all your old FEGLI beneficiary forms. If you're CSRS and you're getting ready to retire, you might as well include it with your retirement application package. Even though the forms in the past are maintained at OPM, it's going to get there just as quick, with your retirement package. The 3102 for FERS is in your OPF. It's going to be pulled out with your retirement application when your agency processes it and forwards to OPM. But if you want to update it, just attach a new one with your retirement application package. All the forms, you can download them by clicking on these web links. It takes you less than 10 minutes to download and fill out all these forms and get them up to date. Okay. Now, if you're separating federal service, but you're not either eligible, you're not old enough to retire, or the only thing you're eligible for is a permanently reduced annuity, maybe you're facing a permanent reduction for early age, like under the FERS minimum retirement age plus 10 option, you can choose to postpone your annuity. So if you're resigning from federal service, you don't apply for retirement until you're ready to claim your pension. Okay, I'm not worried about CSRS, although I did include it here. Because most of my CSRS employees today, you're already eligible for an immediate retirement, so you're never going to worry about a deferred retirement. But I put it there just in case somebody is waiting for deferred retirement at age 2, for example, but you separated back when you were 40. Again, if you're FERS, the deferred/postponed retirement is the same form. And I've given you an information pamphlet that will help you understand the difference between a deferred and a postponed retirement. A postponed retirement is someone who's eligible. They've already reached their minimum retirement age under FERS. They got at least 10 years of credible service, but they don't have enough service to qualify for a full pension. But they don't want to work anymore as for Uncle Sam. They have something else they want to do, so they resign and they wait and claim their postponed retirement later. So they would contact OPM and file the postponed retirement application with them directly. They would get their health and life insurance with that type of retirement, where a deferred retiree doesn't get the federal health and life insurance. That's one of the primary differences between those two types of retirements, but it is the same retirement application package. So I just wanted to include that for the few of you who might be separating but waiting a few years to claim your retirement from OPM. So if you separate and you're going to wait a few years to claim your retirement, you don't go back to your agency. You go directly to OPM and you file these forms. They're a little bit different than the forms that I've been talking about already. Now, if you want to keep federal health insurance or federal life insurance in retirement, you got to have two things in place on the date of your separation to qualify. Number one, you got to be eligible for an immediate retirement on the day you separate from federal service. That's anything except for deferred retirement. And I believe we also talked about this in the January webinar as well. Okay. Number two, even if you're eligible for immediate retirement, you can't keep any level of federal life insurance unless you've had it for the last 5 years of your federal career leading up to that date of separation. You can't keep FEHB in retirement unless you've been covered by FEHB for the last 5 years of your federal career. But let's talk about some of those exceptions real quick. Okay, if I've had TRICARE for the last 5 years of my federal career through my own military retirement or my spouse's, TRICARE can help me meet the 5-year test. But if I don't use the open season before the year of my separation for retirement to sign up for FEHB, I cannot sign up for FEHB later. You see, I must be enrolled in FEHB on the date of my separation. So if I want to use FEHB as a backup plan to my TRICARE, I simply sign up for FEHB during the open season before I retire, and then when I apply for my retirement, I give proof to my agency retirement officers that I've had TRICARE for the last 5 years or more, and they see that I'm currently under FEHB, and they will certify my retirement application that I'm eligible to keep FEHB. And of course, like I said before, if I want to suspend my FEHB immediately upon retirement, I can attach an OPM form 2809 to do so. Now, this 5-year test doesn't say you have to have your own plan for 5 years. If you're a Fed bearer to Fed, it doesn't matter if it's your plan or your spouse's. All you have to do is prove that you've been covered by FEHB for the last 5 years to qualify. So if you're covered by your spouse's FEHB plan, you would want to get copies of their FEHB forms and attach it with your retirement application. So that way your agency doesn't certify your retirement application incorrectly. So many NARFE members have contacted me in the past year, said, James, I'm having trouble getting my own FEHB coverage now that my spouse is retired or now that my spouse passed away, because OPM is telling me that I'm not eligible based on what my agency said, but I was covered by my wife's plan. Well, I eventually helped those people, but it's like pulling teeth. But if they would have simply attached copies of their spouse's health insurance forms to their retirement application, they wouldn't be having to reach out to me a decade later trying to get their health insurance under their own retirement. You don't have to have a family plan for 5 years to keep a family plan in retirement. There are plenty of people who are single when they retire, but they switch to a self-plus-one plan when they get married to somebody later. So I'm just trying to give you some rules of thumb to keep in mind, some exceptions to this 5-year rule. If you're applying for disability retirement, or if you're applying for early retirement, you don't have to meet the 5-year test for health insurance, although FEGLI, you can never waive the 5-year rule under FEGLI, but OPM has the authority to waive the 5-year rule for FEHB if you're a disability annuitant or applying for early retirement from federal service. Okay. So briefly, the standard form 2818 is the form that you're going to include with your retirement application package, telling OPM, this is what I want to do with my federal life insurance, for the rest of my life. You're basically going to say, do I want to keep it or not? And if I want to keep it, what levels do I want to keep? Okay. So your basic insurance is based on your final schedule at the time of separation plus your final basic salary, which for most people, unless you're receiving special law enforcement pay or firefighter pay, it's probably just your regular plus locality pay. You can look at your SF50 personnel actions in your OPF to verify what your basic salary is. They are going to use your final basic salary in your final schedule to determine your basic insurance for retirement. It's what you were signed up for automatically when you were first hired under CS First Refers, and unless you've waived it, you probably had it your entire federal career. So you choose a reduction option. The most popular option is a 75% reduction option. There is about 7 pages worth of instructions that accompany this one form that you fill out with your retirement package. But most people pick the 75% reduction because it's very inexpensive. It's about what they're paying now while working. And if they die before 65, someone gets the full policy because the policy doesn't reduce down to 25% payable until after they turn 65. And when they turn 65, it's free. And even if they pass away 30 years later in their 90s, someone's going to get 25% of their final salary tax-free. That's why most people keep it, because it's like their burial insurance. But use the FEGLI calculator when you're making your decision on what you want to do with your federal life insurance, because the FEGLI calculator will show you what the other options cost, and it could be pretty expensive if you try to choose 50% or no reduction. But if you're not healthy, you're not insurable, if you can't get a better deal elsewhere and you don't want that benefit to reduce, then you might be willing to pay those extra premiums. Option A is an additional coverage that you might have elected to have in addition to basic, because you can't have optional without basic. So if you cancel your basic, you're canceling everything. Okay, but option A is just a flat $10,000 policy, and it works the same way the 75% reduction does for basic. You only pay about $13 a month in retirement for a $10,000 policy on top of your basic between the age of 60 and 65. But at age 65, it's premium free, and the policy never reduces to zero. That level of your policy, that $10,000, reduces down to $2,500 about 3 years later. You'll be on the other side of 68 before it reaches the full 75% reduction. Option B or C, you can carry whatever number of multiples of options B or C that you had. Option B is usually 1 to 5 times your salary. Okay, so option C, you're the beneficiary if you have a spouse or any children younger than 22. You can always reduce. Whatever you elect to carry in retirement, you can always reduce or cancel later. But be careful about canceling, because there's always a free option on the other side of 65 years old. I've seen people cancel their basic at the age of 80 because their spouse died first. I'm like, you chose no reduction, but you could have just switched to the free option, 75% reduction. But they already canceled it before they had before they can talk to me. So I could have helped them switch to a free option that still would have been 25% payable. So be careful about canceling FEGLI if you're already on the other side of 65 years old, because there's always a free option at retirement. Okay, so whatever multiples you choose to carry of option B or C, you choose either no reduction or full reduction for each of those multiples. And full reduction is exactly what it sounds like. Once you turn 65 years old, it's premium free, but that part of your policy will reduce at the rate of 2% per month until about 4 years later, and it'll be a full reduction, nothing else to be paid out other than your basic and option A. No reduction is exactly what it sounds like. It'll never reduce, but be prepared to pay those rates. You can see on the right-hand side of this slide what a $245,000 option B policy would cost, especially when you get into your 60s and beyond. It can be exponentially expensive in retirement. So if I'm healthy and insurable, I'm getting ready to retire in about 3 years, I'm going to look into replacing all my optional coverage with some sort of term or whole life, but I would consider keeping my basic, because I kind of like that 75% reduction option at retirement. Okay. Some of you won't be old enough to claim Medicare when you retire, if you retire from federal service before 65, so you wouldn't worry about this until you turn 65. It's a simple online application process to enroll in Medicare at 65. But for those of you who are still covered by employment health insurance beyond the age of 65, either through your own federal employment or through your spouse's federal employment, for those of you who are feds, married to feds, you might sign up for Part A when you turn 65, but you wouldn't be worrying about Part B if it's not your primary provider while you're still covered by employment health insurance beyond 65, because you'll have a special 8-month enrollment period to sign up for Medicare Part B once you're no longer covered by employment health insurance. When that employment FEHB becomes retirement FEHB, if you want Medicare Part B during that special enrollment period, there's a form that you have to submit to Medicare. Okay, you can call Social Security and talk to them more about it, but the name of the form is the CMS Form 40B. That's only for people who are using their special enrollment period to sign up for Medicare Part B. And you only use that form once you retire, for example. If I'm retiring at the age of 75, that's 10 years worth of Medicare Part B premiums I don't have to worry about paying for, while my employment health insurance is still my primary provider. I've got 8 months to use that CMS Form 40B to sign up during my special enrollment period, and no late enrollment penalties will apply at all. Now, you'll also want to provide proof that you've been covered by employment health insurance using the CMS Form L564. And again, you can click on these forms and access them. And that's for your HR to certify that, yes, this person has been covered by employment health insurance since their 65th birthday. So they'll fill out that form for you. So usually when I apply for my retirement, if I'm retiring beyond 65, I would give that CMS L564 form to my agency retirement office and have them certify it while they're processing my retirement, so I can get that back from them and give it to Medicare when Medicare asks for it. Now, what is the SSA 44 form? Well, if you're retiring beyond 65, but you're going to go from making work income to living off of retirement income, your Medicare Part B premiums are based upon your adjusted gross income that you reported 2 years ago. So if your income is going to come down dramatically, then you don't want to pay Medicare Part B premiums based on your income from 2 years ago. You want to pay premiums based on what you're moving into, what kind of income. So you might want to use that form as well to tell Medicare, please don't charge me too much for my Part B premiums. Okay, and of course, call your carrier and talk to them about how your plan is going to work once Medicare becomes your primary. Read the brochure. Section 9 of every FEHB brochure talks about how that plan works with or without Medicare on the other side of 65 years old in retirement. And maybe call them and have them explain some things to you. Consider switching plans when you have a chance. If Medicare is paying for the majority of your hospital and doctor bills, maybe it's time to switch to a less expensive yet still comprehensive FEHB plan. Matter of fact, Aetna has one of the best plans available to you. It's called Aetna Direct that I'll mention at the very end of today's presentation. And next month in October, our webinar is going to be, Medicare and FEHB, and I have a guest from the Center of Medicare and Medicaid Services that's going to join us, and we're going to talk about Section 9 of your brochure available to you online, OPM's website. Don't forget, use OPM Services Online tools after you retire from federal service. You can use it to review things that you may have forgotten. How much life insurance do I have 20 years into my retirement? I forgot what I elected 20 years ago. Where I become incapacitated and I give the password to my child so my 40-year-old child can figure out what kind of life insurance product I have. So that way, if I'm on my deathbed, they can tell the funeral home, hey, get this stuff ready because we do have plenty of money coming your way, even if we can't afford to pay you up front. I'm just telling you, there's lots of reasons why you or somebody else might want to review things about your retirement, especially if you become incapacitated. But it's really easy to make adjustments and do certain things with OPM that would take months to do if you were to write them a letter or send in a form. You can simply just log into your account and make certain adjustments like changing your mailing address, change where you want your money to go, what bank accounts, print off your statements that you didn't get in the mail, or your 1099-R forms so you can report your taxable income. All sorts of things you can do with retirement services online. So once you have access and you have a password, just remind yourself to log in once a year so that way your password doesn't have to be reset. Log in once a year, maybe during health insurance open season. Take advantage of that opportunity when you're going to spend a little bit of time online anyways, comparing one plan to another, and use some of the tools. Just log in, if nothing else, to keep your password fresh every year for the rest of your life. Lots of good information. There's probably going to be lots more things that you're going to be able to do with the services online as we move forward with technology and the internet. All right, changing your annuity election after you separate. So there's only so many things you can do after you separate based on those elections. You already know that if I'm not married when I retire, if I ever get married later, I've got 2 years from the date of any marriage to elect a survivor benefit for a future spouse if I want to. The future spouses are not protected by law like the current spouses are, where the current spouse would have to sign off on anything less than a maximum survivor benefit. So there's no penalty for making any changes to your elections during the first 30 days. But it's still, if you elected a maximum and try to change it to a partial, you still got to get your spouse to sign that extra -1 form off in front of a notary. If you try to increase it to a maximum, there's no penalty. But once you've been retired for 30 days, if any changes you try to make after the 30 days, it's only an increase. Like if I elected no survivor benefit or a partial survivor benefit, and I want to choose a maximum, I have to pay a penalty on that. I got to pay what I didn't pay previously, and I also have to pay 24.5% of the difference in the cost. That's a penalty that I have to pay. So my point is, maybe make the decision, when you apply for retirement, and don't be changing your mind unless you elect something less than a full survivor benefit for your spouse, but you're dealing with a life-threatening illness that you didn't know about until after you retired. That's the only time that I would consider changing it. But if your marriage ever ends in a death or divorce, you can contact OPM and report that death and not only stop paying for the survivor benefit, but also switch to a self-only plan if you don't have any dependent children under your plan at that time. Social Security is very easy. Use the online tools to apply for Social Security whenever you're ready to claim Social Security. And if you're claiming Medicare at 65, you can also use the online application. It takes you less than 15 minutes, very easy to do. There's very few exceptions where you would need to go schedule an appointment at the local Social Security office and apply for Social Security. So you can schedule that appointment over the phone and go meet somebody in person, but usually it's recommended that you use the easy-to-use online tools to apply for Social Security. And remember, claiming Social Security and also applying for TSP doesn't have to happen the same time that you retire from federal service. You may not even be old enough to claim Social Security. So this little booklet right here, if you click on it, it'll take you to the up-to-date booklet on all your current withdrawal options, which is going to be changing September. So I would expect by next September they're going to change this. But you're not going to be able to take any money out of TSP until you've been separated for about 30 days. Because it takes about 30 days for your agency payroll office to tell TSP that you're no longer employed, but that's when you can start making your withdrawal options if you're ready to start drawing some of your money. Right now, the current withdrawal rules say you can only touch a partial withdrawal once in your lifetime. So if you've already exercised an age-based and service withdrawal, you wouldn't be able to do that again in the future. But that age-based and service withdrawal or the one-time partial withdrawal you have to have after you separate does not have to go into your bank account taxable. That money can be transferred, some or all of it, to an IRA tax-deferred. It's got to be $1,000 or more. But with the new rules that are going to be in place starting next September, you're going to be able to do as many partial withdrawals, as many age-based and service withdrawals as you want. The only limit will be that you have to wait at least 30 days before you do another one. So that's going to give you a lot of flexibility in the future, starting no later than September of 2019. Right now, under the current rules, there's an account withdrawal deadline that if you don't start doing something with your TSP account, once you're separated from federal service and you're on the other side of 70 and a half years old, if you don't make a decision by April 1st after you turn 70 and a half, they're going to freeze your account. But that's something that's going to disappear starting next year. So your account balances will no longer be forfeited to TSP if you wait that long. But the new TSP rules does not change the IRS required minimum distribution rules, so the RMD, which applies after you separate from federal service, but not until after you turn 70 and a half years old. And we do have TSP webinars online right now that you can go and learn more about these IRS required minimum distributions, because they not only apply to TSP, but they also apply to 401k plans and IRAs, traditional IRAs. So the current TSP 70 full withdrawal form looks a little bit like this. There's a section that looks like this where you're telling them, okay, how do I want to exercise my full withdrawal option? Do I want some of it to come out as a single payment? That's kind of like another partial withdrawal. And that money can either go into your bank or partially to an IRA or all of it to an IRA tax deferred. Do I want to take some of this money in my TSP and buy an annuity with it? And I give that money to MetLife and I sign a contract. That's my money for the rest of my life. I get a guaranteed payment, but I can't touch that money anymore because it belongs to TSP. Or do I want to leave some or all of it in TSP and just take out monthly payments, either based on an amount that I elect or maybe monthly payments based on life expectancy? Regardless of what these forms will look like when the new TSP withdrawal rules come into play, use the online withdrawal wizard. That will help you prevent yourself from making mistakes, because tons of people fill out these forms, they submit it to TSP, and what happens is not what they wanted to happen. And so that's the last thing you want, is a bunch of taxable money showing up in your bank account when you intended it to go to a traditional IRA tax deferred. So I do recommend that you log in and use the withdrawal wizards with any withdrawal forms. And don't forget, if you're FERS, you have to get your spouse to sign off on any money that you try to take out of TSP. Unless you try to annuitize. If you want to buy an annuity, which most people don't want to do with your TSP account, you wouldn't need your spouse's permission, but otherwise you would. CSRS folks don't have to do that, but they do have to notify their spouses. And of course, don't forget to sign this. And if you want them to withhold federal taxes, you can attach a W-4 form. They cannot and will not withhold state taxes, but if you live in a state that wants to charge you taxes on your TSP withdrawals, you might want to set that up, either quarterly payments with your state tax office, or just bump up your state tax withholding from either Social Security or your pension with OPM. And of course, with the form, tell them where you want the money to go, whether you want some or all of that money to go to a bank account, direct deposit, or whether you want to transfer some or all that money to traditional versus Roth IRAs. Okay, you mail or fax it to TSP. Call TSP when you fill out the form. Say, hey, look, did I do all this right? Because this is what I want to happen. And just be aware, any money that you buy an annuity with, you can't get that money back once you buy that annuity. You can't cancel it once it's been purchased. Okay. So once the new rules are in play, you can stop your full withdrawal options, or you're not going to be limited to monthly withdrawals. You can change it to quarterly or annually, and you don't have to wait till January to change the amount. You can change the amount anytime you want. And you can also continue to do partial withdrawals even after you're doing monthly or quarterly or annual withdrawals. Okay, and you don't have to choose. You don't have to be forced to touch Roth when you're touching traditional money. So if you have a combination of traditional and Roth TSP, then certainly be aware that you'll be able to tell them, don't touch my Roth, just take the money out of traditional if that's what you want to do. Okay, so briefly, we're almost to the end here. Briefly, let's watch a video of one person's experience of what she did with her TSP account.
My name is Lola. I just left federal service. I rolled my TSP account over into an IRA. I already regret it. I didn't know about the additional annual fees, commissions, and charges I pay on the money I invest. Honestly, it was probably one of the single worst financial actions I've ever taken with my savings. I would deposit some of my retirement savings back into the TSP in a heartbeat if I had another chance. The worst part is, I can't go back. My name is Lola. I just left federal service. I decided to keep my retirement savings in the TSP. It seemed like a no-brainer, really. The TSP has low expenses, so I keep more of what I save. Plus, I can still change my investment mix while continuing to accrue earnings. And I can still transfer other eligible retirement accounts into my TSP. I knew I made the right decision when I heard financial professionals call TSP the best retirement savings and investment vehicle you'll find anywhere. Talk about a confidence boost. I'm glad I thought this decision through. It's not like I have a rewind button.
All right, so you can see applying for your retirement benefits don't all have to happen at the same time, and you're certainly got different forms you're going to be looking at when you're applying for your pension from OPM or Social Security or through a savings plan. Or if you're looking at moving on to another career, there's lots of different steps that you're going to be taking. They don't all have to happen at the same time. So also keep in mind, you're not alone. The Federal Benefits Institute is always available to you Monday through Friday, calling that toll-free number. When prompted, press option 2. We'll get somebody to talk with you, or if you get the voicemail, it just means they're on the phone with someone else. They usually return your call within a business day or two. Or better yet, just drop us an email, and we can reach out to you and try to coordinate a time where we can call you. Always leave us a phone number, even if you email us at fedbenefits@narfe.org. We're here for you to go over anything that you want to talk about, including forms. Again, I want to thank our sponsor, Aetna, for sponsoring today's webinar. A great resource for you. It's definitely take the time this open season and include Aetna as one of your options to compare when you compare your current plan to other plans. And maybe give them a call. Reach out to Aetna and find out what kind of health insurance they can provide you in 2019. They got that Aetna Direct plan. It really works well when Medicare becomes your primary, giving you as much as $1,800 a year to help offset the cost of Medicare Part B, as well as help you pay for your copays and co-insurances on your prescriptions. So Aetna Direct is one of the more popular plans for retirees once Medicare becomes the primary, especially for both you and your spouse if you're both 65 or older. All right. Thank you, Aetna, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. Stick around in a minute or less than a minute. You're going to get instructions on how to join us for the Q&A. I hope to see you there. Otherwise, drop me an email down the road and we can talk later. Thank you.